Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Linda, and this is our 13th podcast. And here's Mike.
Oh, hi, Linda. Welcome, everyone. In this podcast series, we are exploring social threefolding by reading and discussing the original 1919 book by Rudolf Steiner, The Core Points of the Social Question. We need a new societal paradigm today because humanity is evolving toward an ever greater need for freedom. We are outgrowing our old hierarchical society and need to take up the urgent task of social reform with conscious social will. In order to overcome the divisiveness we currently experience, we must decentralize society into three areas. Counterintuitively, perhaps, this will bring about greater unity among people. So, in our last podcast episode, we had begun reading chapter 2, where Steiner begins to describe the principles of a threefold society, which offers the hope of actually solving many of the societal problems we currently face. Steiner opens this second chapter with a description of human physiology, because, as we will be exploring further today, there is a certain comparison to be made between our physical organism and our social organism. Now, overall, we might say that the human physical body manifests as two polarities. At one extreme, we have the nerve sense pole, which is centered in our head organism. This pole has a tendency to be round and closed off, materialized, and immobile. At the other extreme, the human body manifests as a limb organism, as the metabolic pole, which has a tendency to be linear, radial, mobile, and full of life. In between, we have our rib cage, which houses the heart and lung, the center of our rhythmic circulatory system. The rib cage is very curious in that it represents a kind of middle form. In a way, it's rounded and closed like our skull, and in another way, it's also open and linear like our limbs. So this middle area functions as a feeling mediator between the two extremes of head and limb, between thinking and willing, between sensing and movement. So all these three systems, the nerve sense system, the rhythmic circulatory system, and the metabolic limb system, are relatively independent. They cooperate, of course, but they are really three separate systems. The metabolic limb system allows us to be active in the world of space. The rhythmic circulatory system connects us to time, and the nerve sense system to consciousness. Each system has its own unique qualities and its own unique lawfulness and principles. This uniqueness is only possible because the systems are properly organized and articulated, and not all jumbled together. So is that a good précis of what we did last time?
I think so, yes. It really brought it together for me, for sure. Now, it seems our last podcast sparked some engagement, Mike, and we had a number of questions about anthroposophic physiology. And what more can we say about this? I mean, although you had a good synopsis there, is there something more we can say about the topic?
Yeah, I mean, we are very grateful, of course, to our viewers for all the questions that were sent in. Um, and this is a very fascinating topic, but I'm going to say it's not really necessary for us to go deeper into this than we already have. And going deeper would actually be more of a distraction, I would say.
Mhm.
So as we continue to read the second chapter, we will discover that Steiner really only wanted to bring up human physiology by way of comparison.
Mhm.
And he makes abundantly clear in the next few pages that he did not want to suggest in any way that social threefolding is based on physiology, is directly correlated with physiology, or even that studying physiology will help us in any way with our study of social threefolding. These are
Mhm.
two completely different phenomena and two completely separate fields of observation and study. But by introducing this comparison, he really only wanted to point out how the three areas of social life, which is the economy, the right state, and culture, need to become entirely independent of each other, similar to how the nervous, rhythmic, and metabolic systems are entirely independent of each other. Social threefolding is likewise has a certain polarity to it, with economy and culture being the two poles, and the rights life playing a mediating role in the middle. Now, as we will be exploring in the next pages, the nerve sense system is comparable in certain ways to our economic life. Just as our nerves are the most material, least alive part of us, the economic life is likewise the part of our society where we interact to produce, distribute, and consume material goods, coordinated by thinking. At the other extreme, the metabolic limb system is the most living and mobile part of us, and this life of willing may be compared to the spiritual cultural life of society. And in between the rhythmic circulatory system, the pulsing of heart and lung acts like an intermediary between these two poles, and this may be likened to the rights life, also called the political life or the life of the state, with the meaning of government, or the life of public law. This is connected to our human-to-human relations and our life of feeling. Now, I also want to say that this connection between the nerves, economic, and limbs, cultural, can sometimes be confusing. And in some cases, even among writers and other advocates of social threefolding, people can sometimes get this backwards, right? Where they connect the nerves to the spiritual life or the cultural life and the economic with the metabolic system or something, right? Now, Steiner actually addressed this misconception head on in a lecture he gave in Stuttgart on the 24th of June, 1920. And this is published in a cycle called The Polarities in the Evolution of Mankind, which is Collected Works number 197. Now, in this lecture, I'll be quoting from, as part of a larger discussion, he's describing how it is quite different to form analogies based on external observations, as opposed to forming imaginations and perspectives based on truth and reality. So I'm going to just read a quote, a little piece of this lecture. So he says, quote, "If one were to form analogies in such an external way, one would say we have the threefold social organism and the threefold human organism. The head is the organ of intelligence, of spirit, and so it must be compared with the spiritual cultural life of the threefold social organism. The rhythmic system brings about harmony between the various functions, like the activity of the heart and the activity of breathing, and so this corresponds to the rights part of the social organism. Metabolism, the coarsest, the most material, which the mystic looks down upon with a certain contempt, even though they too admit they must eat and drink, this is compared to the economic life." And then he says, "Yet this is not the case. I have often pointed out on other occasions that things in reality are different from what one might believe based on mere analogies. That one cannot say, for example, that summertime can be compared to the waking state of the earth and wintertime to the sleeping state. The truth is otherwise. In summer, the earth sleeps. In winter, it is awake. I have in fact explained this in detail. But it is also the same when one focuses on reality and not on analogies, when comparing the social organism with the human organism. Here, one must compare the economic life within the social organism only with the human head activity. That which is the legal rights life must, of course, because it is the middle one, he says, so people are not mistaken in this analogy, this must be compared with the rhythmic activity. However, the spiritual cultural life must be compared with the metabolism. Thus, the economic life is to be compared with the spiritual organs, and the spiritual life within the social organism with the metabolic organs. There is no way around it. The economic life is the head of the social organism, and the spiritual life is the stomach, liver, and spleen for the social organism, not for the single individual human being. Okay, so this was a long quote from a lecture he gave in Stuttgart in June 1920. I wanted to bring this quote to address some of the misinformation that's floating around out there, even by certain people within the social threefolding space who are still very much thinking in a materialist way. So, yeah. So, as we recall in chapter 1 of the core points, which we just finished, Steiner stressed over and again how social threefolding asks us to think in a different way. And so, perhaps this is the first thinking exercise that we might undertake. How can we think everything such that economics relates to the head and to thinking, while the free cultural life relates to the limbs and forces of will? And I would say that once we can pass through this doorway in our imagination, the whole idea of social threefolding will light up within us with a new and powerful meaning. Okay, so does that help to clarify how human physiology relates to social threefolding for now?
Definitely, and I think that it's really great that you could bring in what Steiner actually said in a different, like to clarify, I guess, any kind of misconceptions that people may have who are familiar with, anthroposophy and the social threefolding. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah, I've seen it printed wrong in books, published books. I've seen it printed wrong on the internet, even by, well, like important threefolding websites. And so it seems like some kind of pernicious misinformation that I just wanted to clarify for our listeners.
Mhm. I hope people appreciate that about you because I think if I've known you for all these years, you are definitely very, very precise and try to do your due diligence in every way, shape, and form to get what Steiner is saying. That's important to you. And I think it's important to our viewers as well.
Yeah, I think it is important because, Steiner was the founder of social threefolding and he had some kind of key insight. And it really is worth our time to understand his way of thinking rather than just impose our kind of way of thinking that might not be so evolved as his onto his ideas and end up with a kind of mishmash that isn't really very helpful.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think for me, it's important to really understand what Steiner was trying to say. And then
Hmm.
once you've understood that, we can debate whether it was a good idea or not. But I think it's worth really understanding first.
For sure. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. All right. So, shall we switch over to the other screen and get going with the reading? What do you think?
Let's switch over. Yes.
Okay. All right. So here we are. This is the beginning of chapter 2, and we had read last time not very much. We only read this page and where he talks about the nervous system and the rhythmic and metabolic system, and then I went off on a whole tangent about all these things. But really, what Steiner says is very brief.
Hmm.
And so let's just go on to the next paragraph, incomplete harmony. And I'm
Hmm.
going to warm this up and say that Steiner had written another book called The Riddles of the Soul 2 years earlier than this book that we're reading now in 1917. And this is collected works number 21, whereas the book we're reading now is 23. Okay. And Steiner provided in this Riddles of the Soul book a kind of sketch of the physiology of the human being from the perspective of anthroposophic science. And that's what we talked about last time. So nothing is said in this other book, that contradicts contemporary scientific research. However, our contemporary science, with its strong bias toward materialism, has still not attained a fully holistic understanding of the human organism. The three bodily systems work with a certain degree of independence. There is no absolute centralization of the human organism, and that is to say, the head may be considered the center of our nervous system, the heart and lungs the center of our circulatory system, and the muscles the center, so to speak, of our metabolic system. Yet none of these are the one single center of the human organism as a whole, right? Our physical organism is not organized in a centralized way. By nature, it is decentralized. Okay, so if you want to read that paragraph, please.
Sure. In complete harmony with everything that scientific research can already say today, I have tried to characterize this refolding of the human natural organism, at least initially in outline form, in my book, Riddles of the Soul. It is clear to me that biology, physiology, and all the natural sciences relating to the human being will, in the very near future, push forward a view of the human organism that will understand how these three members, head system, circulatory system, or chest system, and metabolic system, maintain the overall process in the human organism, how they work with a certain degree of independence, how there is no absolute centralization of the human organism, and how each of these systems also has a special, unique relation to the outside world. The head system through the senses, the circulatory system or rhythmic system through breathing, and the metabolic system through the nutritional and locomotor organs.
Okay, does that make sense? I think he's just saying here this point that there's no absolute centralization in the human organism.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he wants to underline, and as a comparison, can we imagine a social organism that has no absolute centralization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for those who might object and say, well, that's not possible, well, it is possible in the human organism, at least, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that, sort of people may be sort of thinking, wait, well, if he's trying to compare this, but, in all ages of ages, we've always looked for a centralized leader, like a king or an emperor, or, so I'm kind of curious as to where he's going with all of this to compare. So interesting.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to help the reader bridge to a new way of thinking.
Hmm. Hmm.
And saying this isn't so ridiculous because obviously the human organism is like this.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like if the human organism can function in real life, maybe the society can also do this.
Right. Right.
Okay, so
Yep.
let's go on to the next paragraph if you're all right.
Yep.
And in this paragraph, it's a little longer. It carries on to page 47.
Hmm.
He's saying, at this current point in time, I guess in his time, the early 20th century, but we could say in our times as well, contemporary natural science is not prepared to consider the understanding of the human organism that can arise through anthroposophic science, which is what we touched upon last time in our last podcast, right?
Hmm.
Regular science isn't quite ready for all that.
Hmm.
Um, and he says that our entire contemporary way of imagining the world, based on our current habits of thought, are not adequate to the task of understanding the reality of nature. Perhaps we can wait for natural science to evolve. But in the case of an understanding of society, we cannot wait. It is immediately essential that we gain at least an instinctive recognition of the reality of the living social organism. And this is not just for specialists, but for everyone, because everyone participates in the health of the social organism in the here and now. So a healthy thinking, feeling, and willing can only develop if we become clear, even instinctively, that society must be threefold, just like our natural organism.
Hmm.
All right?
Yep. With regard to scientific methods, we have not quite reached the point yet where what I have indicated here, what I have attempted to apply to natural science from a spiritual scientific substrate, can be generally acknowledged, even within natural scientific circles themselves, to such a degree as would seem desirable for the advancement of knowledge. This means, however, our habits of thought, our entire way of imagining the world are not yet completely adequate to that which, for example, presents itself in the human organism as the inner essence of the workings of nature. Now, we could say, well, natural science can wait. It will gradually hasten towards its ideals. It will eventually come to acknowledge this perspective as its own. However, regarding the observation, and especially the functioning of the social organism, we cannot wait. Here, there must be at least an instinctive recognition of what is necessary for the social organism, not just for some specialists, but within every human soul, because every human soul participates in the effectiveness of the social organism. Healthy thinking and feeling, a healthy will and desire regarding the shaping of the social organism can only develop when we are clear, even if more or less purely instinctively, how this social organism, in order to be healthy, must be threefold, just like our natural organism.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think he's saying basically that, the scientific side of physiology, we can have medicine, we can have, physiotherapy and things like that without really having to fully understand the body and how it really works in
Mm-hmm.
truth. We can make do with where we are, and science will slowly find its way to a better understanding over time. But he's saying this is not the case with our social organism. We can't wait. We're kind of in an urgent situation, and we can't just wait for some science to come up with an understanding of sociology.
Mm-hmm.
We have to push forward with the practical things of how to organize ourselves so that
Mm-hmm.
we are doing better than we are now, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, it's funny because it's not funny. It's actually sad. The fact that he brought this up 100 years ago or so, and it was urgent then, and we have an urgency now. I mean, anyone who is disturbed by societal norms now, you know, where are we going? I mean, I sort of invite people to kind of look at it and say, where are we going? What are we doing? It's almost like we're repeating over and over and over again the mistakes of the past kind of thing, you
Yeah,
know?
and I feel like we're caught up in this kind of pendulum swing between capitalism and socialism, and we feel like we're stuck in this cycle. And
Hmm.
and Steiner is basically saying we need to break out of the dualism into this threefold concept,
Hmm.
and we have to learn to think differently.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this is urgent, this
Hmm.
this new imagination. Okay. Now, in the next paragraph, he speaks about some contemporary people, and he's basically criticizing them. So we'll just do this briefly. Back in the 1870s, a guy named Albert Scheffler, a German economist and sociologist, wrote several books comparing the human organism to the social organism.
Hmm.
And in an entirely materialistic way, he compared, for example, government and bureaucracy to the brain and nervous system. He compared economics with the metabolism and the circulatory system. And then another fellow, the Hungarian sociologist Karoly Mérey-Höváth, who's known as Murray, published a German edition of his book World Mutation, in which he argued that history progresses through punctuated social mutations that lead to the development of new social organs. So, this social theory of Murray aligned with the mutation theory of biological evolution at the time, which believed that biological evolution occurs through sudden, massive changes. Now, to Steiner, all of this is misguided. All of this is just a playing around with analogies by people who have not yet fathomed the depths of what is intended here. We must not merely graft biological truths onto the social organism. Instead, we must avail ourselves of the natural organism to learn how to observe life, and then we can apply the same ability to observe life to the social organism. Just as we must study the natural organism independently, according to its own laws, so must we study the social organism independently, according to its own laws. The moment we approach the social organism scientifically, all playing with analogies ceases. Make sense?
Yep,
Okay, if you'd like to read that, please.
sure. Since Scheffel wrote his book about the structure of the social organism, attempts have been made to find analogies between the organization of a natural being, let us say the organization of the human being, and human society as such. People wanted to determine what the cell is within the social organism, what cell structures are, what tissues are, and so on. Indeed, just recently a book was published by Murray, World Mutation, in which certain scientific facts and scientific laws are simply transferred, supposedly, to the human social organism. What is meant here has absolutely nothing to do with any of these things, with any of this playing with analogies. And anyone who believes that such a play of analogies between the natural and the social organism is also happening in these considerations merely proves they have not fathomed the spirit of what is meant here. For the aim here is not to transplant some truth suitable for natural scientific facts onto the social organism. Rather, it is something completely different. That human thinking, human feeling, learns to sense what is possible in life by reflecting on the natural organism, and then becomes able to apply the same way of sensing to the social organism. If we simply transfer what we believe we have learned from the natural organism to the social organism, as often happens, we only show that we do not want to acquire the abilities to observe the social organism independently as something in its own right, and to research it according to its own laws, like we need to do to understand the natural organism. The moment we really objectively approach the social organism like a natural scientist would approach the natural organism in order to sense its own laws, at that moment, given the gravity of the consideration, any play of analogies ceases.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So essentially, I think what he's saying, at least in the end part here, is you wouldn't want to send in a sociologist to study physiology and and use this as the basis of medicine. And in the same way, you wouldn't necessarily send a medical doctor in to study sociology. If each of these are fields in their own right, and you need to study them in their own right. And so he's saying it's not a matter of analogy. We can maybe think of the comparison to help us get started, but once we get going, we really need to look at each thing in its own way.
Yeah, because I mean, as if I understood this correctly, that they operate within their own laws. So
Mhm.
there's a difference between physiology and sociology. So yeah, big differences, but yeah, with their own like their own field, as you said. Yes.
Right. And so we can't just study the nervous system and make abstract conclusions about economics, right? This is
Hmm.
not what he's saying.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, let's move on to the next paragraph. So in this, he's saying that the idea of social threefolding is not in any way based on natural science or the systems of the human organism. Instead, at the present time, individuals must cultivate certain feelings in relation to different aspects of social life. Just as the four operations of arithmetic, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, are taught in school, so must these specific feelings about the social organism also be taught in school. Until now, our social understanding is mostly learned unconsciously and instinctively, but this merely perpetuates existing social forms from the past. The new social evolution demands that we learn to feel how social forces are supposed to work in a healthy way so that society can prove viable. Increasingly, people will consider it unhealthy and antisocial to have these social feelings without wanting to be active in the social organism. Okay, could you read that, please, Linda?
Yes. We could also think that the presentation given here is based on the belief that social organism is supposed to be built up from a gray theory modeled on natural science. But that would be as far away as possible from what is being discussed here. Something completely different is intended. The current historical crisis of humanity requires that certain feelings arise in each individual human being, and that the education and school system provide the stimulus for these feelings, in the same way it does for learning the four operations of arithmetic. What has until now not been consciously incorporated into the human soul, resulting in the old forms of the social organism, this will no longer be effectual in the future. It belongs to the new evolutionary impulses that want to enter human life from now on, that the indicated feelings are to be demanded by each individual human being, just as a certain level of schooling has long been demanded. From now on, people will demand that we must learn to feel in a healthy way how the forces of the social organism ought to work so that it proves viable. We will have to acquire a sense that it is unhealthy, antisocial, not to want to place ourselves into this organism with such feelings.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think he's saying that in the past, we've done everything very instinctively. Like up until now, what we think about society, we kind of pick it up through, our life experience. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
really taught to us in school and whatever. It's not really a conscious understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
what social threefolding demands is that each of the three areas has its own qualities, its own characteristics, its own principles, and that we need to sort of consciously learn these things like we would learn how adding is different than subtracting or multiplying.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't just mush it all together into something and
Mm-hmm.
or expect people to just figure it out on their own. But I think it's a real conscious learning that he's suggesting here.
Right, right. I mean, when he was talking about feeling, it was kind of like, okay, how does that work? To have feeling about this or that. Like, I mean, can you expand a little bit on what he
Yeah.
means by having feeling?
Yeah, I think what he means is feeling has two sides to it, right? There's feeling like the emotion, and there's
Mhm.
feeling like sensing.
Okay.
And so I think he kind of means both of this, that when we think about, let's say, economics, there is a certain emotion, a certain sensing that belongs to what is economics.
Mhm.
That is
Mhm.
a different feeling, a different sensing than when we talk about the rights life.
Mhm.
So when we think about what is the law, the relations between humans and other humans, the democratic process, this is actually a different feeling quality
Mhm.
than economics.
Mhm.
The cultural
Sorry,
life
sorry.
is a third feeling, which
Mhm.
is different than the other two.
Mhm.
And I think he's saying that it's necessary just to, first of all, develop these different feeling sense emotions to distinguish the three different areas.
Hmm.
That's the sort of first point.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and if I understand, I mean, with his example of the arithmetic, sort of addition being different to subtraction, and sort of, so we have a better, clearer understanding of how each is different. Maybe the sensing and the feeling into each aspect is necessary to distinguish, say, I guess the bark of a tree to the leaves of a tree, like just really having an understanding that okay, these are different, like, and how are they different?
Well,
They
I'll give you an
operate.
example, maybe
Mhm.
because I was a math teacher. Uh, let's say there's a word problem and it says, so and so has three apples, and the
Mhm.
apples are $4 each, or that's a
Mhm.
pretty expensive apple. But
Mhm.
let's say the word problem said that. Now,
Mhm.
it takes a certain feeling to know you have these two numbers, three apples and $4. Do you add these numbers together?
Mhm.
Or do you multiply these two numbers together,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And the word problem will sort of give you if you practice math, if you study arithmetic, you will gain this understanding that in this case you need to multiply the numbers,
Mhm.
whereas in
Mhm.
another problem you would add numbers.
Mhm.
And I think this is the analogy here that in this situation, this is a really an economic quality, not a rights quality or a cultural quality. Whereas
Okay.
this situation over here, this is more of a cultural quality, not an economic quality, you know?
Okay.
And what the problem is today that we don't really have these well differentiated feelings. And it's
Mhm.
kind of like we haven't learned, we're presented with word problems that we don't know, should we add or multiply or what should we do? Like we don't really understand what to do in each
Got it.
situation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That helps. Yes, that helps immensely, for
And
sure.
it's almost like we have to learn this. Like it's not just it isn't just intuitive. We have to be educated in this way,
Mhm.
maybe even
Mhm.
in school at a young age.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, that was very helpful.
All right. So let's move on to the next paragraph then. This short little paragraph. Today we hear. And
Mhm.
so we have to again put this in the context of the time. So during the post-war German socialist revolution, there was
Mhm.
a movement to transfer key industries, especially the coal and potash mining industries, from private ownership to the state or public ownership. And this process was called socialization.
Mhm.
Now, this movement was closely linked to demands to create workers' and soldiers' councils, which were modeled after the Russian Soviets.
Mhm.
Um, and these would give labor a direct voice in management of these public socialized industries. Now, ultimately, however, the Social Democratic president of the Weimar Republic, Friedrich Ebert, was able to crush the many violent uprisings and bring order and stability to the country.
Mhm.
And although some limited pro-worker measures were taken, the broad socialization of industry was effectively shut down. Now, Steiner, from his perspective, right at the very time of this German socialist revolution, Steiner considered the socialization to be an unhealthy and even destructive idea,
Mhm.
unless at least an instinctive understanding for the necessity of social threefolding were to enter into human feelings. So, if the social organism is to function in a healthy way, it must develop three members, three independent social areas, according to a certain social lawfulness. Okay? So that's a lot of explanation for a short paragraph. If you want to just read it, please.
Sure. Today we hear about socialization as something people say is necessary in our times. This socialization will not be a healing process for the social organism, but rather so much quackery, perhaps even a destructive process, if at least the instinctive recognition of the necessity of the threefolding of social organism does not enter into human hearts, into human souls. This social organism, if it is to have a healthy effect, must develop three members in a lawful way.
Okay, so he's
Mhm,
saying this to kind of bridge. Now he's going to speak about each of these three members,
mhm,
the three folds, as it were, of the threefolding.
mhm,
And yeah, and I think he's just saying that he wants to really lock down this idea that the qualities need to enter into human hearts and souls. The economic has a different quality than the rights life, has a different quality than the cultural life. And
mhm,
this is necessary to have a healthy effect, even if things go this way or that way in society.
mhm.
Okay?
Yep.
So he's about to talk about the three different areas in more detail. And
Mhm,
the next paragraph begins, one of these is the economic life. Okay. So he's going to
mhm,
start with the economic life. And he's going to say that in our times, the economic life has come to play a dominant role within society due to the powerful evolution of modern technology and capitalism. However, this economic life must become independent of the rest of society, just as the nerve sense system of the human organism is relatively independent. And then he gives a definition of sorts. The economic life is everything having to do with all aspects of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods. So he's kind of defining it here. All right.
mhm,
So if you could
mhm.
read that, please, that little paragraph.
Yep. One of these social members is the economic life. Here, we begin with the consideration of the economic life because it is so obviously incorporated itself into human society through modern technology and modern capitalism, dominating the rest of social life. This economic life must be an independent member in and of itself within the social organism, as relatively independent as the nerve sense system in the human organism is relatively independent. The economic life has to do with all aspects of production, circulation, and consumption of goods.
Okay. So again, he's connecting economic with the nerve sense system, as we talked about before. So let's not get confused. And he's saying a definition. And this is a very common, this isn't necessarily original with Steiner. A lot of people will define economic life this way: production of goods, circulation or distribution of goods, and consumption of goods. All of this is the economic life. And we'll note that he does not mention money in here. Money, the financial world is a separate category from economics. Some people think it's connected. In a way, money is a means of exchange. Money is a way to facilitate the circulation and therefore the production and consumption of goods. But you can have an economy without any money. So they're not synonymous.
What? That's
Yeah.
that's very different from
Yeah,
what.
theoretically you could have an economy that's a purely barter economy where people are just
Okay.
producing and exchanging and consuming and there's no money at all, right?
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
just wanted to say that because some people think, oh, money, this is economics. But
Hmm.
no, it's a separate topic called finance.
Okay.
And it's certainly interrelated with economy, but it's not the same thing. Economy is, if you imagine, strip away the money and just think of the production, the distribution, and the consumption of goods. That's all.
Hmm.
It's a social activity, right? Because
Hmm.
very often we produce for others. We
Hmm.
consume what others produce, and all of this is circulated in through, different kinds of transport systems, and well, there's a whole world to this.
Hmm.
Okay? That's the economy.
Interesting. Okay.
So in the second next paragraph, he says the second member. So now he's going to move on and just briefly define or sketch out the notion. Basically, the second member is the life of public law.
Hmm.
the political life, or the rights state.
Hmm.
Now, this relates to the notion of the legal state. Okay, so there's this phrase, legal state, which is a 19th century continental European doctrine that believed that governmental power must itself be constrained by law in order to protect citizens from injustice at the hands of the state.
Hmm.
So, in contrast to the economic life, the rights life is defined as all aspects of what relates to human relations arising out of purely human foundations, which is to say, all the rights and obligations that one human being has in relation to another purely because we are human, independently of all the personal individual differences. So we must develop a specific feeling for this in life, and this feeling will lead to the separation of the rights life from the economic life. Just as in the human organism, the breathing activity of the lungs separates off from our nerve sense activity.
Hmm.
Okay, so if you'd like to read that paragraph, please.
Sure. The second member of the social organism that comes under consideration is the life of public law, the actual political life. This includes what we could describe as the actual life of the state, in the sense of the old legal state. Whereas the economic life has to do with everything that the human being needs from nature and from our own production, with goods, the circulation and consumption of goods. The second member of the social organism has only to do with all aspects of what relates to human relations arising out of purely human foundations. It is essential for our recognition of the members of the social organism to know the difference between the system of public law, which can only have to do with the relation of human to human from purely human foundations, and the economic system, which only has to do with production, circulation, and consumption of goods. We must differentiate this in life by feeling, so that as a result of this feeling, the economic life detaches from the rights life. Just as in the human natural organism, the activity of the lungs that process the external air separates off from what occurs in the nerve sense life.
Okay, great. Thank you, Linda. So
Yeah.
again, he's connecting the rights life to the middle realm, to the rhythmic system, the circulatory system, the breathing, the heart and lungs, and so on. And so, yeah, he's saying that this kind of central rhythmic system is the what we would call the rights state, or in the German case, the legal state.
Mhm.
So, I don't know how much depth we want to go into this topic, but I'll just refer to on page 71. There's a translator note that I added when I was doing the translation of this. And I just wanted to say that the term that Steiner uses, the Rechtsstaat, is translated here and hereafter as legal state. And this refers to a doctrine within German jurisprudence dating back as far as Immanuel Kant, who lived in the late 18th century, specifying that a constitutional state must itself conform to the rule of law and be morally just, right? So just there's different theories. I'll just say briefly, different theories of law and what's the role of the state in law. And
Mhm.
in the continental, like the German, Central European conception, the state is the point of origin of rights. So if you have a right as a citizen, it's because of the state gives you the right.
Mhm.
And this is one theory, which is called the legal state. And and furthermore, the state is constituted through a constitution. And this constitution limits the powers of the state, right? So the state is the point of origin of rights, but the state itself must conform to its own laws.
Mhm.
Now, this is a very different way of thinking from the English and the American common law system. The common law system is the sort of the opposite, which basically believes that as a natural person, you have natural rights. And the state doesn't give you these rights. These rights are a fact of
Hmm.
nature, and the state merely adjudicates and enforces these rights.
Hmm.
So the rights don't come from the state. The
Hmm.
rights are managed by the state.
Hmm.
So these are two different theories of rights, okay?
Hmm.
And I don't know if we want to get into all this, but this is what Steiner's talking about here. That the in the
Sure.
German now it changed a bit when the old German Empire dissolved and the Weimar Republic came to be. They changed the constitution, and then after World War II, like in 1949, they changed it again. So the
Hmm.
German system has gone through a number of constitutional reforms and changes, but
Hmm.
in this process, Steiner is speaking about these different forms,
Hmm.
we'll say. Okay? So I don't know if you have any questions or that's good.
Well, I mean, it's good, and I mean, it definitely is important to sort of have an understanding of the differences because I know there's differences, but I didn't quite know. I know that a little bit of just because I've lived in England, so there's that the right from comes from God or something like that, and like you said, nature comes from nature, and therefore we are the stewards of that right. And there's a limitation. And there needs to be some goodwill, I guess.
So the British system, the English and British system evolved into what's called parliamentary supremacy, which basically says the parliament is the number one top lawgiver, and no parliament can pass a law that binds a future parliament.
Hmm.
So a parliament is the supreme power in this system, whereas in
Okay.
the Central European system, it's the constitution. And over time, these two systems have kind of come together a little bit, and so that in different countries, the there comes to be, for example, the justice system may be able to say this law is unconstitutional,
Hmm.
and that places the justice system above the parliament, and they can reject laws on the basis of the Constitution.
Hmm.
So the systems are kind of coming together over time and evolving. It's a little bit complicated. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, we don't need to get into all the details of
No.
this. It's
Yeah.
quite fascinating, but at the same time, however the rights life is constituted, this way or that way, under this philosophy or that philosophy, there
Mm.
is needs to be some kind of feeling quality comparable to the rhythmic system called the rights life. And this rights life, which may differ from one nation to another, or one place to another, this is a separate entity from the economic life.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is the important thing here.
Hmm.
Has a totally different feeling, a totally different definition. The rights life has nothing to do with the production, distribution, and consumption of goods.
Hmm.
It's only about these human to human relations. How do we relate? What are our rights and obligations to each other as humans?
Hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say the third member. So we'll introduce this third member at the top of page 50 here. The third member is the spiritual cultural life, or we could simply say the cultural life.
Hmm.
And this is defined as everything that arises on the basis of the talents of a single human individual that then enters and plays a role within the social organism. So this cultural life includes human abilities of all kinds,
Hmm.
physical abilities, social abilities, abilities of soul, as well as mental and creative abilities. So the first area, the economic life, has to do with our relation to the outer material world. The second area, the rights life, has to do with our human to human relations. And now this third area, the cultural life, has to do with everything that enters the social organism from the single human individuality. Okay? If you
Yep,
could read that, please.
sure. The third member to grasp within the social organism, which must likewise stand independently alongside the other two members, is that which relates to the spiritual life. More precisely, we could say, since the term spiritual culture, or everything that relates to spiritual life, is perhaps not entirely precise. Everything that is based on the natural talent of each single human individual, everything that must come into social organism founded on this natural talent, spiritual as well as physical, of each single human individual. The first system, the economic system, has to do with everything that has to be there so that people can regulate their material relation to the outside world. The second system has to do with what must be there in the social organism because of the relation from human to human. The third system has to do with everything that must sprout from and must be integrated into the social organism by the single human individuality.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
I just wanted to repeat we had talked about this before, this word spiritual, but it was a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Steiner doesn't mean anything oogly boogly here. He means essentially it's a translation of the word geistig in German, which is just something like mental or intelligence or creativity or that kind of thing. So he's not speaking of something otherworldly at all. He's just saying the things that develop from our individual intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a separate field. Okay. We
Mm-hmm.
have the life of goods, the life of rights, and then we have this third element that has to do with human abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying it could be physical abilities. So this could be sports as well as, musical abilities or intellectual abilities or anything like this. All of this. And that's the third area.
Right. So as a kind of a definition of each area, as sort of he's delineating it so that we can understand, okay, what's this? The rights, obviously, it just is clearly sort of everything to do with the legal aspects of things. And, I guess, like you said, human to human,
Mhm.
um, how do we treat each other? And obviously, it needs to have a modicum of fairness
Yeah.
and, sort of notwithstanding how our personal feelings are towards each other,
Mm.
but, that sort of um, meet a higher realm of understanding that, okay, so we need to be kind to each other no matter what and fair with each other no matter what. I guess I hope that's the intention.
Yeah.
And the economic world, which is really interesting for me, like, the material sort of production, consumption, and circulation of goods, like the material sort of stuff. And with um, the what is it? The cultural life is to do with what as an individual can I bring? And he's saying the word must. Did I read that right? It must be integrated or somewhere in that. Yeah, must sprout from and must be integrated into the social organism. So that's an interesting piece for me. He's saying must. That's a pretty strong word. It's like, so we need to be able to create room for each individual then in that society.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
interesting.
think he is distinguishing between what we do sort of intellectually or creatively alone for ourselves by ourselves that has nothing to do with other people. And he's differentiating that from the social side, that what enters the social organism from our abilities and creativities. And
Mm,
so if it's not entering into the social organism, it's not part of the social organism.
hmm
And then he speaks on the other extreme in his economics lectures that if we're not producing for others or consuming what others produce, if we're just producing for ourselves and consuming for ourselves, like a self-sufficiency, that's also not really part of the economic life. It's not
Hmm.
part of the social organism. We're
Okay.
we're just doing this for ourselves, and so we're not really being social here. So when he means the social organism, he's referring to what we do in relation to each other
Okay.
socially,
Got it.
right?
Hmm.
So maybe we'll bring this to a close for this podcast. And I
Sure.
think this is a nice place to wrap up this notion of these three different feeling qualities, the quality of economics, the quality of the rights life, and the quality of the cultural life,
Hmm.
spiritual cultural life.
Hmm.
Okay?
Definitely. Thank you, Mike. Yes, this was very interesting.
Okay. All right. So we'll see you next time.
Sounds like it. Take care. See you
Okay.
next time.
Bye for now.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like and subscribe.